In 1978, a nuclear-powered satellite crashed into Canada. The cleanup bill ran into the millions. 18 months later, an entire space station fell on Australia. The bill? $400. For littering. Same sky. Same decade. 2 falling spacecraft, and 2 wildly different invoices. The difference is a treaty most people have never heard of. Let's read it. Space Law's founders knew one thing for certain. What goes up eventually comes down. They had watched Sputnik's rocket body streak across the sky in 1957 and asked the obvious question. If that thing lands on a farmhouse, who pays? And in whose court? Ordinary law had answers for ships and airplanes, built over centuries of wrecks and collisions. Space had nothing but momentum. 50s lawyers filled entire journals with hypothetical falling satellites before a single real one had fallen. And any answer had to work between enemies, at Cold War temperatures, without admitting that fault meant weakness. Suing a foreign superpower in your local courthouse is somewhere between hopeless and impossible. A treaty had to route around that. So in 1972, the world agreed on the Liability Convention, the rulebook for damage done by falling spacecraft. Its core rule is brutally simple. If your space object hurts someone on the ground, you pay. Not you pay if you were careless. You pay, period. Lawyers call it absolute liability. The drafters borrowed the idea from Earth's most dangerous industries. The same rule we use for reservoirs that burst and reactors that leak. No proving fault. No arguing negligence. Your rocket, your registry, your bill. The treaty even covers airplanes in flight. Anything your object hits on the way down is on your tab. And the claim runs country to country. Your government presents the invoice, so you never face a superpower alone. There's no cap, either. No maximum payout, no deductible, no fine print limiting a catastrophic claim. Up in orbit, between 2 spacecraft, the rule softens. There, you pay only if you were at fault. Why the difference? On the ground, you're an innocent bystander. In orbit, you chose to be there. But for the ground below, the treaty made every falling bolt the launcher's problem. Always. Within 6 years, the paperwork got its first, and so far only, full-scale test. January 1978. A Soviet radar satellite called Cosmos 954 tumbles out of control. It was built to track ships at sea, and it was hungry for power. Solar panels were too weak for its radar, so its designers reached for uranium and accepted the consequences of flying it low. So on board sat a nuclear reactor, and below sat northern Canada. On January 24th, it broke apart on re-entry, scattering radioactive debris across tens of thousands of square kilometers of frozen wilderness. For weeks, it was a live national security drama. Nobody knew how much uranium had survived, or where it slept under the snow. Canadian and American teams swept the snow for months, by air and on foot. They called it Operation Morning Light. The searchers covered an area the size of a small country, in polar darkness, at 40 below. Nearly every fragment they recovered was radioactive. Some pieces could have killed a person standing nearby. Under the treaty, damage meant more than craters. Contaminating a landscape counts, even an empty one. Canada's claim leaned hard on that. Then Canada did what no country had ever done. It formally invoked the Liability Convention and sent Moscow a bill. Just over 6 million Canadian dollars, itemized, down to the last helicopter hour. The claims cited the treaty article by article, a legal first, drafted in Parkas. Moscow stalled, haggled, and 3 years later paid $3 million in settlement. No court ever ruled. None needed to. The convention is built to settle claims through diplomacy first. The settlement also set quiet habits that stuck. Notify early, share tracking data, keep the politics out of the math. Half price. But the precedent held. When your satellite falls on someone, the invoice is real. It remains the only time the convention has been formally invoked between states. So far. Which brings us to July 1979, and a 77-ton problem named Skylab. America's first space station was coming down, and nobody could steer it. NASA had studied sending the shuttle up to boost it. The shuttle was late. The sun was not. The world turned it into a carnival. Newspapers sold Skylab survival kits. Hotels painted targets on their roofs. Bookies took bets. In America, Skylab watching parties filled rooftops, and T-shirts sold impact predictions like weather forecasts. Its orbit was never meant to end this way. An unusually angry sun had swollen the atmosphere and dragged Skylab down years early. Engineers could only nudge the station's tumble and pray the math favored open water. Mostly it did. It broke up over the Indian Ocean and rained glowing pieces across Western Australia. Nobody was hurt. And a San Francisco newspaper had offered $10,000 for the first piece delivered to its newsroom. 17-year-old Stan Thornton grabbed charred fragments from his roof, caught a flight, and collected the prize. Under the convention, Australia could have billed Washington for any actual damage. It never did. Allies don't always invoice each other. Filing over scorched sheep paddocks would have cost more in goodwill than it recovered in dollars. Instead, the Shire of Esperance ticketed NASA $400 for littering. A joke with perfect legal timing. NASA, no doubt advised by careful lawyers, left it unpaid for 30 years. In 2009, a California radio host raised the money from listeners and finally settled the fine. Esperance got the last word anyway. The town still displays Skylab's wreckage in its museum. 2 crashes, 2 invoices, $6 million enforced by treaty, $400 paid by radio. Both, in their way, worked. That was when a falling spacecraft was rare news. It isn't rare anymore. Thousands of satellites now share the sky, and pieces of them come home almost every day. More objects went up last year than in the entire first decade of the space age. Most burn up harmlessly. Operators aim the big ones at the emptiest water on Earth, a spacecraft graveyard in the far South Pacific. The odds of any one person being hit remain tiny, trillions to 1. The odds of it happening somewhere, someday, keep shrinking towards certainty. The graveyard's rules are house rules, coordination and custom, not treaty. The treaty only prices the failures. Regulators are tightening the front end too. New American rules give dead satellites 5 years to clear out of orbit. And the penalties are no longer abstract. Regulators have already fined an operator for abandoning a satellite in the wrong orbit. Insurance mirrors the treaty. Launch operators carry liability cover, and governments stand behind them for the catastrophic tail. The system even got a domestic test recently. Debris from the space station punched through a family's roof in Florida. They sent NASA a claim. American debris, American house, American paperwork. The lawyers are still busy with it. That case matters because it prices a new kind of risk. Mega-constellation-era debris meeting suburban rooftops. And the biggest reentry in history is already on the calendar. The International Space Station, around the early 2030s. 400 tons, aimed carefully at that same empty stretch of ocean, with the 1972 convention still standing underneath. A dedicated tug is being built for the job, the first vehicle ever designed to destroy a space station politely. If a piece goes astray and hits something, the old rule hasn't aged a day, the launcher pays. Space law rarely makes headlines. It makes invoices. The convention has no police and no court of its own, and exactly one settled case in 50 years, and that is what success looks like here. Next time a light streaks the wrong way across the night sky, somewhere a lawyer already knows whose problem it is. And somewhere between a $6 million tundra cleanup and a $400 littering ticket sits the whole system, working as designed. Quiet rules, written before they were needed, waiting patiently for gravity to do its work. Gravity, it turns out, is the most reliable client in space law. 50 years on, the drafter's bet still looks right. Make the launcher pay, keep the lawyers ready, and let gravity meet paperwork. The sky isn't falling, but when it does, the paperwork is ready. Follow Space Docket.